The wedding hall fell into a strange silence the moment the groom stepped fully into view. Hundreds of eyes widened, whispers rolled like restless waves across the room. Some guests stood on their toes, others leaned forward, disbelief written openly on their faces. Phones were raised not to capture love but to capture shock. At the center of it all stood Aria Bellamy. At 23, she looked like something carved from grace itself. Caramel skin glowing under crystal chandeliers, natural hair gathered neatly into a soft bun, her white gown flowing like quiet confidence. She was the only daughter of Victor Bellamy, a billionaire whose name commanded respect in every business room from Atlanta to London. People expected her wedding to be flawless, powerful, and predictable. What they did not expect was the man beside her. The groom stood tall in spirit but short in body. His dark skin contrasted sharply with his crisp black suit. His posture was straight, his shoulders steady, but his height barely reached Arya's chest. A short dwarf standing in a hall built for giants. A laugh slipped out somewhere in the crowd. Then another. Soon murmurs turned bold. Is this a joke? That's the groom. Is she blind? A woman near the aisle covered her mouth, not in shock but in amusement. A group of men near the back shook their heads, smirking openly. Out of all the men in the world, one whispered loudly, she chose that. Arya felt it, every sound, every stare, but her hand did not loosen from his. The priest hesitated, unsure whether to continue or pause. The groom looked ahead, his jaw tight, eyes calm but heavy. He had known this would happen, still knowing did not make it easier. From the front row, Victor Bellamy sat frozen. His face showed no anger, no pride, only deep concern. He had built empires, he had faced boardroom wars, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The mocking grew louder. Billionaire's daughter marries a dwarf. Must be pity. Probably a stunt. Then someone laughed again, louder than before. That was when Arya stopped walking. The music faded, her heels remained planted on the marble floor. The entire hall waited, confused. Slowly, Arya turned her head toward the crowd. Her eyes were calm, but there was fire in them. She opened her mouth to speak. And at that exact moment, a man stood up from the third row, his voice slicing through the room like a blade. This wedding is a lie. Gasps exploded across the hall. Arya's fingers tightened around the groom's hand. The groom closed his eyes. And just like that, the perfect wedding shattered into something far more dangerous. The truth was about to fight its way to the surface. But before anyone could say another word, before security could move, before the priest could speak, Arya lifted her chin and took one steady breath. And the hall leaned forward, unaware that this love story was not beginning, but being judged. The reason for everything remained hidden for now. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise that came before it. The groom opened his eyes again, his gaze fixed straight ahead. He had walked into this hall knowing he would be mocked. What he did not know was how close the truth was to escaping. And as Arya finally turned back toward him, the weight of her smile carried a secret no one in that room could imagine. The story of how she survived. The story of why he stood beside her. The story of the sacrifice that bound them forever. And just before the priest could speak again, before the man who interrupted could be silenced, before the whispers could return, the groom whispered softly, only for Arya to hear. Are you ready? Arya nodded. Because once the past came out, nothing would ever be the same again. And the world was about to learn that love does not always look the way people expect it to. But first, it would have to survive the cruelty of the present. The truth waited patiently in the shadows, ready to shock everyone who laughed. And the wedding had only just begun. The whispers returned the moment Arya and the groom began to walk again. The man who had shouted was quickly pulled back into his seat by security, but the damage was already done. Curiosity burned hotter than judgment now. People wanted answers, they wanted scandal, they wanted to know why. The groom took one careful step after another, his polished shoes echoing softly on the marble floor. His name was Elias Moore. Few people in that hall knew it, fewer cared to learn it. All they saw was his height. They did not see the years behind his eyes. They did not see the scars that never showed. The priest cleared his throat and continued the ceremony, though his voice trembled. Vows were spoken, but many ears were not listening. Cameras zoomed in, guests leaned toward each other, whispering stories they made up on the spot. She must be rebelling against her father. He probably trapped her. There's no way this is real love. Arya heard them all, each word landed like a slap, but her face remained steady. She had learned long ago that pain did not always deserve a reaction. Ilias, however, felt every word like a stone added to his chest. As they stood at the altar, his mind drifted backward, far away from chandeliers and silk gowns, back to a time when Arya was not glowing, not smiling, not standing strong. Back to a hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and fear. 5 years earlier, Arya Bellamy had been dying. It started with fainting spells, then constant pain, then the diagnosis no one wanted to hear: her kidneys were failing fast. Doctors tried treatments. Money bought the best care, the best machines, the best specialists, but money could not buy time. Victor Bellamy had gone from boardrooms to hospital halls, begging quietly behind closed doors. Arya's mother had passed years before, and now the thought of losing his only child crushed him. They needed a kidney donor. Family members were tested first. None matched. Then came friends. No match. Then suitors. And there were many. Men who once promised Arya forever suddenly found reasons to disappear. Some claimed health issues, others stopped answering calls, a few were honest enough to say they were scared. One by one they vanished. Arya noticed. She noticed the empty chairs in her hospital room, the silence where laughter used to be. She noticed how people loved her beauty, her status, her future, but not her fear. Ilias was not one of the suitors. He worked as a maintenance technician in the hospital. Quiet, observant, short in height, often overlooked. People spoke over him, around him, past him. But he noticed Arya. He noticed how she smiled even when pain twisted her face. He noticed how she thanked nurses even when she could barely lift her hand. He noticed how lonely she became. One night during a late shift, Ilias overheard a doctor speaking softly outside her room. She won't last 6 months without a transplant. The word sank deep into him. Ilias did not know why he stopped walking. He did not know why his feet turned toward her door. He only knew that something inside him refused to let him keep moving. He stood there for a long time before knocking. Arya looked surprised to see him, then she smiled. "You're the guy who fixes the lights," she said weakly. Ilias nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "You don't have to call me that," she replied. "I'm not scary." That night they talked. Not about money, not about status, about music, childhood, fear, faith. Ilias did not tell her he was alone in the world. He did not tell her how many times people had laughed at him, ignored him, treated him like he was less. He just listened. Days turned into weeks. Ilias began stopping by regularly, sometimes just to say hello, sometimes to sit quietly, sometimes to make her laugh when the pain made her cry. When Arya asked him why he kept coming, he shrugged. Someone should. When the doctors announced they were running out of options, Ilias did something no one expected. He asked to be tested. The nurse looked at him twice. "Are you family?" "No. A friend." "Yes," he said simply. The tests came back. He was a perfect match. The room went silent when the doctor delivered the news. Victor Bellamy stared at Ilias like he was looking at a ghost. "You understand the risks?" Victor asked. Ilias nodded. "You could die." "I know. And you gain nothing from this." Ilias looked through the glass window at Arya lying on the bed. "I gain her life." The surgery was long, complicated, dangerous. But it worked. Arya lived. Ilias nearly didn't. Recovery was slow, painful, lonely. When Arya woke up and learned what he had done, she cried harder than she had cried at any point during her illness. She tried to thank him, tried to speak. Ilias stopped her gently. "You don't owe me anything." But time has a way of turning gratitude into something deeper. Something stronger. Back in the wedding hall, Arya looked at Ilias and smiled, not the polite smile she gave the world, but the real one. The one that remembered hospital nights and quiet courage. The priest asked if anyone had objections. The room held its breath. Ilias swallowed. Arya squeezed his hand. because the biggest objection had not yet been spoken. And when it came, it would shake everything they had built. The past was catching up, and it was not coming quietly. The priest repeated the question, louder this time. If anyone here has a reason why this couple should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace. The hall froze. No one moved at first, then a chair scraped loudly against the floor. Victor Bellamy stood up. Gasps rippled through the crowd, phones tilted, whispers flared again. The billionaire's face was calm, but his eyes carried a storm that only a father could hold. Arya's heart skipped. "Dad," she whispered, not in fear but in warning. Victor walked slowly toward the altar. Every step felt heavy, not because of pride but because of memory. He stopped in front of Elias and looked down at him. The height difference made the moment even more uncomfortable for the watching crowd. Some expected anger, others expected humiliation. Victor spoke carefully. "Do you love my daughter?" Elias did not hesitate. "Yes, sir." "Enough to give up your life?" Elias met his gaze. "I already did." The hall went silent. Victor turned to the guests. "You mock what you don't understand," he said firmly. "You see height but you don't see heart, you see money but you don't see sacrifice." Murmurs rose, confused now unsure. Victor took a deep breath. "5 years ago my daughter was dying." Arya closed her eyes. He was the only one who stayed, the only one who gave when others ran. A woman in the crowd frowned. "What does that mean?" Victor pointed at Elias. "That man gave my daughter his kidney." The hall erupted. Gasp shouts disbelief. "No way. That's impossible. Why would he do that?" Victor raised his hand for silence. "He saved her life not for money, not for fame, but because he loved her when she had nothing to offer but fear." The mocking smiles faded, some faces turned pale, others dropped their eyes in shame. Arya stepped forward. "I am alive because of him," she said clearly. "Every breath I take belongs to the sacrifice he made." Elias felt tears burn his eyes, but he did not let them fall. "I didn't choose him because he is short," Arya continued. "I chose him because when I was broken he was strong, when I was dying he gave me life." Silence wrapped the hall. Then something unexpected happened. A man in the back began to clap. Slowly, awkwardly. Another joined. Then another. Until the hall filled with applause, not loud, not perfect, but real. Still, not everyone was convinced. A woman whispered sharply, "That still doesn't make sense. Love doesn't grow from pity." Arya turned toward the sound. "This isn't pity," she said calmly, "this is respect." The priest cleared his throat again, his voice steadier now. "Shall we continue?" Elias looked at Arya, she nodded. As the vows resumed, the mood had shifted, but tension still hung in the air. Truth had been revealed but not fully accepted. Because while many now understood, some still judged. And judgment once planted does not die easily. As the rings were exchanged, Elias' hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the weight of the moment. When the priest finally declared them husband and wife, the applause returned, louder this time. But just as relief began to settle, a woman screamed. Everyone turned. At the side of the hall, a figure collapsed to the floor. Arya's mother's old friend Margaret clutched her chest, her face drained of color. People rushed toward her. The wedding had barely survived the truth. And now something else was unfolding. Something that would test this union in ways no one expected. Before the scene could calm, before doctors could reach her, Margaret whispered something that made Victor freeze. It wasn't an accident, Arya's illness. Victor's blood ran cold. And just like that, the celebration was swallowed by a new, terrifying question. If Arya's sickness was not fate, then what was it? The wedding hall no longer felt like a place of celebration. Margaret was rushed out on a stretcher, her weak whisper echoing louder in Victor Bellamy's mind than the applause that had filled the room moments earlier. Guests stood confused, some frightened, others eager for gossip. The joy that had begun to bloom was cut short, replaced by a thick tension that refused to leave. Arya stood frozen, her fingers gripping Elias' hand. It wasn't an accident, Arya's illness. The words replayed again and again in her head. What did she mean? Arya asked quietly, her voice shaking. Victor did not answer right away. His face had gone stiff, his eyes distant. He had spent billions fighting enemies in business, but this felt different. This felt personal. "We need to leave," Victor finally said, "now." The reception was cancelled without explanation. Guests were escorted out politely but firmly. Rumors exploded before people even reached the parking lot. Social media lit up with half-truths and cruel captions. Videos of the mocking earlier spread fast, but now they were followed by clips of Victor's speech and Margaret's collapse. By nightfall, the wedding was trending for all the wrong reasons. Arya and Elias were driven to Victor's private residence on the outskirts of Atlanta. The house was large, quiet, and guarded. It had once felt safe to Arya. Tonight it felt like a place filled with ghosts. In the living room, Victor paced back and forth. 5 years, he muttered. 5 years, and not once did I consider this. Consider what? Elias asked gently. Victor stopped and looked at him, really looked at him. Not as the man his daughter married, not as a hero, but as someone who had already proven he could be trusted. That someone might have caused Arya's illness. Arya's breath caught. "Dad, what are you saying?" Victor walked to a locked cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. He hesitated before opening it, like a man afraid of what he might find. "When you got sick," he said, "the doctors called it sudden, unusual, rare. They said sometimes these things just happen." He flipped through documents. "But Margaret was your mother's closest friend. She helped raise you when your mother was alive. She was around the house often, around your food, your drinks." Arya felt a chill crawl up her spine. "No," she whispered, "why would she do that?" Victor's jaw tightened. "Because she hated your mother." The words landed hard. "She blamed her for my success," Victor continued, "for choosing me, for leaving her behind." Elias listened silently. His mind moved carefully, piecing things together. "That's not enough to poison someone," Elias said. Victor nodded. "No, it's not." He pulled out a medical report. "But this is." The report showed traces, small, almost invisible amounts of toxins that could slowly damage the kidneys over time. So slow that it could be mistaken for a natural illness. Arya sank into the couch. "So all this time," her voice broke, "someone was hurting me." Victor closed the folder. "Margaret collapsed today because she's been sick too. Guilt does strange things to the body." Silence swallowed the room. Elias felt anger rise inside him, sharp and hot. Not for himself, for Arya, for the pain she endured, for the nights he sat beside her hospital bed believing the world was cruel by chance, not by choice. "She needs to tell the truth," Elias said. "If she lives long enough to," Victor replied grimly. That night's sleep did not come easily. Arya lay awake beside Elias, staring at the ceiling. The wedding dress was gone, replaced by a simple robe, but her heart still felt heavy. "I'm scared," she admitted softly. Elias turned toward her. "Of what?" "That my life was saved, but my peace won't be." Elias reached for her hand. "Whatever comes, you won't face it alone." Arya looked at him, tears shining in her eyes. "People laughed at you today, they judged you, and still you're the calmest person in this house." Elias smiled faintly. "I've been judged my whole life, this is just louder." The next morning, Victor received a call from the hospital. Margaret was awake, and she was asking to see Arya. Against his instincts, Victor agreed. The hospital room was quiet when they arrived. Margaret looked smaller, weaker, nothing like the proud woman Arya remembered from childhood. When Margaret saw Arya, tears rolled down her face. "I didn't mean to go that far," she whispered. Arya stood still. "You meant to hurt me." Margaret nodded slowly. "I wanted to hurt your mother, but she was gone, you were all that was left." Elias clenched his fists. "Why?" Arya asked. Margaret swallowed. "Because I felt invisible, because watching you grow up with everything reminded me of everything I lost." Victor stepped forward. "You destroyed my daughter's body." "I know," Margaret sobbed, "and I deserve whatever comes." Doctors entered the room, ending the conversation. As they left the hospital, Arya felt something change inside her. The mystery was no longer a mystery, but closure did not bring peace, it brought responsibility. "What happens now?" she asked. Victor looked ahead. "Justice. But justice has a way of pulling everyone into its path." And as the car drove away, Elias felt a strange weight settle on his chest. because the truth had come out. But the consequences were only beginning. Justice did not come quietly. By the next morning, lawyers were involved. Doctors reviewed old reports. Investigators reopened files that had been sealed and forgotten. What was once labeled a rare medical tragedy was now being examined as a slow, deliberate crime. News spread fast. Headlines changed tone overnight. From billionaire's daughter marries dwarf groom to wedding uncovers shocking poisoning plot. The same people who mocked Elias now spoke his name with respect, some even with guilt. But respect from strangers did little to calm the storm inside Arya. She sat in Victor's study, staring at the garden outside the glass doors. The sunlight was warm, but she felt cold. "All those nights," she said softly, "all that pain, I kept thinking my body had betrayed me." Victor stood behind her. "I failed you, I should have protected you better." Arya turned. "Dad, stop, you didn't know." "But I trusted the wrong person," he replied, "and that almost cost me my daughter." Across the room, Elias stood quietly, leaning against the wall. Since the wedding, he had become the center of attention in ways he never wanted. Reporters requested interviews, talk shows debated his story, social media painted him as a hero. But Elias did not feel like one. He still woke up some mornings with pain in his side. He still tired faster than others. The kidney donation had saved Arya, but it had permanently changed his life too. That afternoon, Arya noticed him rubbing his side. "You're hurting again," she said. Elias shook his head. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing," she replied firmly. "You gave up part of yourself for me." Elias met her eyes. "I gave it willingly, I don't regret it." "I know," Arya said, "but loving someone doesn't mean ignoring their pain." The words settled between them, heavy and honest. Later that day, they visited Margaret again, but this time police officers waited outside her room. She had confessed. The evidence was strong. Arrest was inevitable. Margaret looked at Arya one last time. "I can never undo what I did," she said weakly, "but I want you to know I see now how wrong I was." Arya studied her carefully. For the first time, she did not feel anger, only sadness. "I forgive you," Arya said quietly, "not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." Margaret broke down sobbing. As officers led her away, Elias placed a hand on Arya's back. "You're stronger than you know," he said. Arya shook her head. "No, I survived because someone else was strong first." That evening, Victor hosted a small dinner, no cameras, no staff, just family. For the first time, Elias sat at the head of the table beside Arya, not as an outsider, not as a curiosity, but as a son-in-law. Victor raised his glass. "To truth," he said, "and to the man who reminded me that character is not measured in inches." Elias swallowed hard. But even as the room filled with warmth, something unseen was brewing. Later that night, Elias received a call from an unknown number. He answered. A cold voice spoke. "You think the story is over?" Elias' body went still. "Who is this?" he asked. A short laugh followed. Margaret didn't act alone. The line went dead. Elias stared at the phone. Outside, the lights of the estate glowed peacefully, unaware that another shadow had just stepped forward. And this time, it wasn't coming from the past. It was watching them now. Elias did not sleep that night. The voice on the phone echoed in his mind over and over. Margaret didn't act alone. He lay beside Arya, listening to her slow breathing, watching the rise and fall of her chest, the living proof of why none of this could be ignored. At dawn, he quietly got out of bed and stepped onto the balcony. The estate looked peaceful, almost innocent, but Elias knew better. Danger rarely announced itself loudly, sometimes it whispered. When Victor joined him minutes later, Elias did not pretend everything was fine. "Someone called me last night," Elias said. Victor's expression hardened instantly. "What kind of call?" Elias repeated the words exactly. Victor was silent for a long moment, then he nodded once. "I suspected as much." "You knew?" Elias asked. "I feared it," Victor replied. "Margaret didn't have access to certain substances alone. Someone helped her, someone inside my circle." Arya joined them wrapped in a shawl. "You're talking about betrayal again," she said softly. Victor looked at his daughter with regret. "I wish I was." By mid-morning, private investigators arrived. Not police, not yet. Victor wanted answers before the world got involved again. Files were reopened, old staff lists reviewed, security footage from years ago was pulled from archived servers. The investigators worked quietly, carefully, following patterns others had missed. And then a name surfaced. Dr. Leon Carter, one of the specialists who had overseen Arya's treatment in the early stages. He always said her case was unusual, Arya recalled, but he never pushed for deeper testing. Victor clenched his jaw because he didn't want the toxins discovered too early. The pieces began to align. Margaret had access to Arya's meals at home. Dr. Carter had access to her medical records and the authority to dismiss suspicions. Together, they created the perfect cover. When investigators traced financial records, the truth became undeniable. Dr. Carter had received regular payments from an offshore account linked to Margaret. The betrayal cut deep. People trusted him, Arya said. He was supposed to heal. Elias spoke quietly. Some people wear white coats the way others wear masks. That afternoon, Dr. Carter was brought in for questioning. He denied everything at first, claimed innocence, claimed coincidence. Until Victor placed the evidence on the table. Bank transfers, emails, medical logs altered by his own credentials. Dr. Carter's shoulders slumped. I didn't think it would go that far, he muttered. Margaret said she just wanted to make her weak, to remind her father that money doesn't protect everything. Elias stepped forward, anger flashing in his eyes. You nearly killed her. Dr. Carter looked away. I know. The confession was recorded, charges were prepared. This time justice would not be delayed. But as the case unfolded, another tension rose quietly. The public reaction. Some praised Elias as a hero, others twisted the story again, now questioning Arya's motives. She married him out of guilt. She owed him her life. It's not real love. Arya read the comments one night and closed her tablet slowly. Do they really think I'm trapped? She asked. Elias sat beside her. People understand what they're capable of, not what you are. Arya turned to him. Do you ever feel like you sacrifice too much? Elias answered honestly, sometimes, but never when I look at you. Still the pressure grew. Talk shows invited Arya alone. Reporters requested Elias separately, hoping for cracks, for drama, for doubt. Victor watched carefully, worried not about reputation, but about his daughter's heart. One evening, as rain fell heavily outside, Arya stood before Elias with a serious expression. I need to ask you something, she said. Elias nodded. Anything. If I had never gotten sick, would you still have loved me? Elias did not answer immediately. He thought carefully, not because he doubted but because the question deserved honesty. I might not have known you, he said finally, but loving you now isn't about what happened then, it's about who you are now. Arya's eyes filled with tears, not sadness but relief. She stepped forward and hugged him tightly. That's all I needed to hear. The storm outside passed, but the world beyond their walls was still loud, still judging. The arrests of Margaret and Dr. Carter became public the next day. The story shifted again. From mockery to shock to something closer to respect. But even respect can carry expectations. And Elias could feel them pressing down, questions about his worth, his role, his place in a world that never made room for people like him. As he stood in the doorway watching Arya laugh softly with Victor, Elias wondered something he had never allowed himself to ask before. Was love enough to survive the weight of the world? Or would the world eventually demand a price too high for even love to pay? The world did not quiet down after the arrests. If anything, it grew louder. Invitations poured in, charity events, interviews, award ceremonies. Elias' name appeared on lists he never imagined. Man of courage, selfless hero, modern inspiration. Each title felt heavy. At a charity gala in New York, Elias stood beside Arya under bright lights. Cameras flashed, smiles were demanded. The room was filled with tall men in tailored suits and women in glittering gowns. Elias felt every inch of difference between himself and them, not in height but in belonging. Arya sensed it. You don't have to stay long, she whispered. Elias smiled faintly. I'm okay. But he was. As they moved through the crowd, compliments followed him like echoes. You're amazing. You're so brave. You're an example to us all. No one asked how he felt now. No one asked what it cost him. Later that night, back at the hotel, Elias sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his side again. The pain had been getting worse lately, more frequent, sharper. Arya noticed immediately. "We need to see a doctor," she said. Elias hesitated. "I don't want to worry you." "You already are," she replied. The next morning they visited a private clinic. Tests were run, blood drawn, scans taken. The doctor returned with a serious expression. "There's been strain on your remaining kidney," he said carefully. "Likely from years of overexertion and stress. You've been pushing your body too hard." Arya's heart dropped. "What does that mean?" "It means," the doctor continued, "he needs rest, less travel, less pressure, otherwise the damage could become permanent." On the drive back the car was silent. Arya finally spoke. "We cancel everything." Elias shook his head. "No, your foundation launch is next month, your speech." "I don't care," Arya said firmly. "I didn't survive to lose you slowly." Elias turned to her. "I don't want to be the reason you stop living." Arya's voice softened. "You're the reason I started." The word stayed with him. But Elias carried another fear, one he had not shared. That night, alone on the balcony, he looked out at the city lights and thought about the call weeks earlier, about enemies that didn't disappear just because arrests were made. He felt watched. The feeling became real 3 days later. A black SUV followed them after a dinner in Atlanta. It kept its distance, turned when they turned, slowed when they slowed. Victor noticed too. Security was increased, routes were changed. Then came the message. A letter arrived at Victor's office, no return address, inside only a single sentence typed on plain paper. "You took something that doesn't belong to you." Victor's blood ran cold. Investigators traced the paper, the ink, the delivery. It led back to a shell company tied to Margaret's extended family, people who believed Elias had destroyed their legacy by exposing the truth. "They want revenge," Victor said grimly. "For what?" Arya asked. "For saving my life." "For humiliating them," Victor replied. "Some people value pride more than human life." Security tightened further. But danger doesn't always strike loudly. Sometimes it waits. At a public park fundraiser weeks later, Elias excused himself to get water. The crowd was light, relaxed, music played softly, children laughed nearby. He felt a sudden shove. Hard. Elias fell to the ground, pain exploding through his side. People screamed, security rushed in. The attacker vanished into the crowd. Arya ran to Elias, dropping to her knees. "I'm okay," he tried to say, but his voice cracked. An ambulance arrived within minutes. At the hospital, doctors worked fast. Tests showed bruising near his kidney, not fatal but dangerous. Arya sat beside him, shaking. "This is my fault," she whispered, "all of this attention." Elias reached for her hand weakly. "No, this is the price of truth." Victor stood nearby, anger burning in his eyes. "They won't touch you again," he vowed, "I promise." But promises did not erase fear. Weeks passed, the attacker was never caught. Life slowed. Events were canceled, public appearances stopped. Arya stayed home with Elias, learning a quieter rhythm, simple meals, slow walks, long conversations. In the quiet, something unexpected happened. Peace. Without cameras, without judgment, they rediscovered each other not as symbols, but as two people who had survived something terrible together. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset, Elias spoke softly. "If things get worse, if my health fails," he paused, struggling, "I don't want you to feel trapped." Arya turned sharply. "Don't say that." "I need you to hear it," he continued. "I love you enough to let you go if that's what keeps you safe." Arya stared at him, then stood up, anger flashing. "You think I married you out of debt," she said, voice trembling. "After everything, you still think I'd walk away because it gets hard." She stepped closer. "I married you because you stayed when it was hard." Elias' eyes filled with tears. Arya rested her forehead against his. "And I'm not leaving." They held each other as the sky darkened. But somewhere beyond the quiet estate walls, someone else was watching. And while Elias believed the worst had passed, fate had one final test waiting. One that would not ask for sacrifice. It would demand a choice. And that choice would decide everything. The choice came sooner than anyone expected. It arrived on an ordinary morning, wrapped in calm sunlight and the illusion of safety. Arya was in the kitchen preparing tea when Victor's head of security rushed in, his face tight with urgency. "They've found him," he said. Elias looked up from the table. "Found who?" "The man who attacked you at the fundraiser." Silence filled the room. "He's in custody," the security chief continued, "and he's talking." At the private interrogation room later that day, Elias sat beside Arya, his hand resting in hers. The man across the table looked nothing like a monster. He was thin, tired, and afraid. "I didn't want to hurt you," the man said quickly, looking at Elias. "I was told to scare you, to make you disappear quietly." "By who?" Victor asked. The man swallowed. "Margaret's cousin. He said the marriage was a disgrace, that you took something meant for people like them." Elias felt a familiar heaviness in his chest, not pain this time but understanding. "They were never after Arya," Elias said quietly. "They were after me." The man nodded. "They thought if you left the story would fade." The truth settled like dust after a storm. Later that evening, Victor gathered them in his study. "This ends now," Victor said. "We press charges, we make it public, no shadows left." Arya listened, but her eyes stayed on Elias. That night, when the house finally fell quiet, Elias stood alone in the dark living room. He had spent his life being ignored. Now he was a target, not because of wealth or power, but because he had mattered. Arya found him there. "You're thinking again," she said softly. Elias turned to her. "I don't want to be the reason danger follows you everywhere." Arya stepped closer. "You are the reason I'm alive." He shook his head. "Love shouldn't cost you peace." Arya looked at him steadily. "Love doesn't promise safety, it promises truth." Elias exhaled slowly. "Then hear mine." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "If my presence keeps drawing this kind of threat, I would step away, not because I don't love you, but because I do." The words hurt him as much as they hurt her. Arya was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached for his hand and placed it over her chest. "Do you feel that?" she asked. He nodded. "That heart beats because you chose to stand where others ran," she said. "If I let you walk away now, I'd be betraying the very life you gave me." Tears filled Elias' eyes. "You don't owe me your future," he said. "I owe myself my truth," Arya replied, "and my truth is you." The next morning, Arya did something unexpected. She called a press conference. Victor tried to stop her. "You don't need to expose yourself again." "I do," she said calmly, "because hiding is what gave them power." The cameras rolled, the room filled, silence fell. Arya stepped forward alone. "I was poisoned," she said plainly. "I survived because one man gave me a part of his body when he had no reason to believe the world would ever be kind to him." She looked directly into the cameras. "People laughed at my husband because of his height, they questioned my choice because of his appearance, but when I was dying, appearances didn't save me, love did." The room was still. Threats were made, violence followed, and I want to say this clearly: if loving a man who saved my life is considered a mistake, then I will make that mistake proudly every single day. The response was immediate. Support poured in, messages from survivors, from donors, from people who had once been judged and dismissed. The narrative finally changed. Months passed. The trial concluded, those responsible were sentenced, security relaxed slowly, the fear loosened its grip. Elias' health stabilized with rest and care, the pain became manageable, the days became gentler. One evening, Arya and Elias returned to the same wedding hall. It was empty now, quiet. They stood where the laughter once echoed. "Do you regret it?" Elias asked softly. Arya smiled. "Regret marrying the man who gave me life." She shook her head. "I regret only one thing." "What?" Elias asked. "Not telling the world sooner that love doesn't need permission to exist." They stood together, not as symbols, not as headlines, but as two people who had survived judgment, danger, and fear without letting bitterness win. Elias had once believed he was invisible. But he learned something greater. He was not invisible. He was invaluable. An Arya once saved by sacrifice now lived by choice. A choice that proved to the world that the strongest love often comes in forms people are too small-minded to recognize. If this story moved you, now is the moment. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who believes love should be judged by heart, not appearance. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Arya's place? Have you ever seen love misunderstood this way? Your voice matters.